Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this week's Community Office Hours. My name is Taylor Dolezal, and I am a Senior Developer Advocate here at HashiCorp. You can find me anywhere online as @onlydole. Please at me if you have any questions or if there's anything you'd like to talk about. Typically, I like talking about orchestration and book recommendations. I know I'm currently working on my Goodreads goal for the year. So if you have anything that might be fun to read during the Thanksgiving break, I would absolutely appreciate it. I'm here today with guest Cody Arkland, who's the Technical Product Marketing Manager here at HashiCorp. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love for you to interact with us via our chat. I can find that just off to the side. As you do, please keep in mind that our code of conduct is in effect in this virtual space. I'll post the link to that here. You can see that in the chat. In general, be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient. Simply be excellent to one another. We want to bring out the best in not only your workflows, but in the interactions that we have here today. I've posted that community guidelines link if you care to check that out. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So here's our title card. Today, we're mostly going to be focusing on Waypoint and talking with Cody about some workflows and questions that we have on that front. We did have a couple questions come in before our office hours kicked off. And so I'd love to start off with some of those questions, talk with Cody, get some answers on that front. Feel free to throw any questions you have into the chat and we'll get those answered as well. And then we'll take a look at some live demos and answer other questions that you might have depending on the time that we have today. So welcome, Cody.
Hey.
Hopefully you've had a wonderful morning. You've got enough caffeine in your system. You're good to go.
Yeah. Just had another webinar, so finished that up, and happy to come hang out with you and the community, guys.
Yes, I'm so excited. So Waypoint, very, very excited to see, very happy to talk with others in the space about what we're doing here at HashiCorp and kind of what the overall focus is on Waypoint. Personally, I'm very excited to see that it's been set up with plugins and just there are so many ways to go about using it. One question that I had for you was, do you know what the inspiration was for the project? Seeing it in its 0.1 state, we have a really good idea. But do you have any more insight or answers on kind of what inspired that project?
Yeah. I'm happy to take a stab at it. This is definitely like a Mitchell Hashimoto, obviously founder of the company, had a lot of visions around Waypoint, and a lot of things he was really targeting for the project. And something we've talked a lot about was this idea that, like, hey, we've done a lot of stuff in, if you look going way back in time, look at Vagrant. Vagrant was a tool for getting developers an environment to work on. And one of my favorite things when I came aboard was hearing like the story of why Mitchell created this. Was like he would have these projects that he'd work on, he'd move on to the next project, but then former project would ask him to come back and do something for him, and he'd have to spin back up all the stuff he removed off previously. So we started building these Vagrant boxes. And we built this as a tool for developers, and then we moved on and we started doing these tools for operators. And you look at things like Terraform and Vault and Console and Nomad, and these are tools that operators use to do like operator things in an environment. They're usually like central IT building a thing to supply out to groups, whether they're open source users or they're enterprises. Like they're serving these things out as like a platform. Nomad, a platform for people running software in, or Terraform, a platform for people to deploy and manage resources in. But something that gets kind of lost in there is how does somebody who's developing applications take the actual application itself and get it running against those things? And that's not like where the project's at today as far as like fully integrated with all of those services, but like how do we actually take that application build experience and make it better? And we heard this from customers in the context of like, hey, you've given us a lot of tools that make securing our secrets good, or running our projects good, or deploying the things that our projects run on really well. But how can we make that process better? And there was a ton of things out in the market that solved parts of this, but nothing that really solved kind of that full build, deploy, release flow of where an application goes, right? Like you can look at CI/CD as probably like one of the closest places to that, but CI/CD ultimately ends up being a ton of just like wired together bash scripts and commands and weird integrations to try and kind of stitch this thing together. It really ends up being a task runner to go and do all of this stuff. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a ton of managed complexity at that point. And you're like, when I go in and build a pipeline, it's often, okay, I'm going to build the first stage of the pipeline and I'm going to run it like 30 times until I get it working, until I get it working right and tuned right. And then once that's executing fine, I'm on to the next part of it. And eventually you get better at it, but you're still artisanally crafting every stage of that pipeline all the way through. And what we targeted in Waypoint was how can we make that entire process consistent between different CI tools, consistent via running on your laptop, and how can we take away that need to handcraft every stage of this and make it a consistent process that moves through that build, deploy, release flow. So how do we take that app and say, hey, this is an application that I need to build the binaries, drop them onto a destination of some type, ECS, EKS, Azure Container Instances, whatever, Docker. And then from there, how do we expose it out and have people be able to access it? So it's really about easing that developer burden of actually like building, deploying, and releasing the applications that they're working with, as opposed to the supporting infrastructure around it. Really long answer, but I hope it gave some clarity.
No, and thank you so much for clarifying that too. I think that's in my experience when talking with people about Waypoint, there has been some confusion on what workflows does this fit best with, and I think that you summed that up very well in kind of talking about how it really is this fragmented space, and you can always find someone at any company to have a bash script to run a specific thing, or like, oh, hold on, I've got the script for that, type of experience. So it's really nice to have one place to plug all that together. So
sorry, I think I was getting a cut out of my. I'm sorry about that. The other thing to think about is that like CI/CD, like PaaS did a lot of this really well, right? Like PaaS did this, like things like Heroku or things like Vercel do this really well. But what happens when you want to take something that lives in Vercel and move it on to ECS? Things go poorly. So something else to think about there is like the other side of that. We talked about CI/CD, but like the PaaS offering aspect of it is another thing to think about, is how do we give that consistency and that mobility outside of that space?
It's so true, and I like that there's the ability to, like if I wanted to go, say, from ECS to EKS, like you said, it's very easy to kind of change direction on that front, and it's not something that you have to completely retool, which makes me pretty happy. Even when it comes to that, that release step, if I want to alert different Slack channels, or like say, hey, let's go from email to Slack or what have you, there's that option, and I like that that's something that we have available to us instead of having to redo too much work there. So keeping that build, deploy, release cycle a lot more dry than it has been before. That's awesome. There's one, I'm going to post this here in the chat. That reminded me, there's this one post from Cindy, someone that's fantastic in the SRE and in the overall DevOps community. She posted a blog post when Waypoint came out as to what Waypoint is versus what it is not. And it was just, again, a very succinct way of talking about Waypoint and some of the problems that it aims to solve. So really, really thankful for that. Thank you so much, Cindy. Awesome. Moving on to our next question. Where might the project go in terms of a roadmap? So I know this is a pretty standard question when it comes to something like this. I know there's been a lot that's happened, after launch too. I think we're at like 0.15, if I'm not mistaken. So lots of things coming up. But do you have any sense as to kind of what where the project's going in terms of the roadmap?
Yeah, so this one's a little bit of a tricky one because I'm not the product manager for it. So there's a great woman by the name of Jen Bryden, who is the product manager for Waypoint. She's got a really cool vision of like where the product's going. So I can speculate a little bit, but like, again, this is under the hospice, like Cody's perspective and what I've gleaned from stuff we can share. Because obviously there's stuff that we can't always dump everything out, but it is an open source project, and a lot of the stuff you can actually go in and look at and see where it's going. And we also publish a roadmap on Waypoint project.io, so you can see kind of what the ideas are behind where the project's going. I would say, keep an eye out in the space of like the way we bring configurations in to applications. So being able to apply, I don't want to say like, it's not configuration management, but it's more about like when you have specific configuration items within an application, how do you apply those dynamically? So bring in like configurations in that aspect, something we're looking at. Better templating around the actual Waypoint job file. How do we actually like have a little bit more dynamic attitude within that? Within that is something we're looking at a lot. Improving like that CI/CD experience, because really like that's a space that we think Waypoint shines really well in. So how do we have Waypoint run cleaner in CI/CD? There's a couple of calls like in the UI around being able to remotely execute like against workloads from within the UI. You can do that in the CLI today. But honestly, like a lot of it is also listening to the community and listening to what people are saying are the gaps. Like if you look back when we released 0.1, we got a ton of feedback, positive feedback around ECS, and like there was a lot of people using it for Amazon ECS, and so like there was a lot of features that came out of that to make the ECS experience better. We're very in touch with like listening into what the community is saying, like on the HashiCorp discuss forum about Waypoint, and really trying to make sure that the stuff we're doing ties back to what the community is asking for. So if there's gaps or there's things you want to see, speak up there. The other thing I'll say is keep an eye on like the release space. The release space is admittedly a little light right now. And that's because like we really wanted to pay attention to what ecosystem things people are asking for. So like, I represent console typically. We see console, like a lot of console stuff living within that release space, right? Like how do we apply traffic policy? How do we split traffic between environments? Like these aren't things that are like formally on the roadmap at this point, but like watch that release space, because the release space is going to be where like a lot of maturation is going to happen around how services are released into production or released into an environment for people to consume.
Awesome. And somebody did ask, is there a public roadmap page for Waypoint? I was able to find that on the Waypoint Project IO page and paste in a link there. So please be sure to check that out as well. And like Cody said, if you have any features that you'd like to see added or just kind of would really like to talk that through, please feel free to open up an issue. We can go ahead and discuss that as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, Cody. This is a question I snuck in there. What notable things have you seen that have been added since launch? I tracked, leading up to the 0.1 release pretty closely. And then I think from 0.10 to 0.15, I've seen a flurry of activity and haven't really gone through the changelog to see what has changed. But have you seen any notable things get added or moved or changed since the project launched?
I think that what excites me, like I'm a big user experience nerd. Like I care a lot about like how like I think that you decide very quickly on tools that resonate with the problems you're trying to solve or the things you're working on. And so I really appreciate the amount of like user experience stuff that's been added. I'm a huge, like, as you know, we talk about this often. I'm a huge Kind user. So I use Kubernetes and Docker a lot. Mitchell added some functionality around checking for Kind instances and like giving people like a friendly warning of like, hey, make sure you've handled load balancing and stuff like that. We've added a lot. Actually an internal submission by someone not formally on the team, but like just contributing to the project, added a lot of better checks around Kubernetes to make sure that, because as you know, Taylor, like when a service that comes up in Kubernetes isn't always up in Kubernetes until it's up, right? And it's a confusing statement intentionally, but like there's times where you get a load balancer in front of something and the probes haven't kicked in yet, so it's not fully alive. So you'll go and hit it and you'll get like a 404 not found, and you'll be like, oh, SADS for 30 more seconds until it picks up. So we added some stuff to like guard against that, to make like when you get the waypoint URL, it's actually up. And if you don't get the waypoint URL, it's not up yet. So we've added some better intelligent checks around that. A lot of good ECS enhancements just to make the ECS experience better. I'd say we're on the cusp of some like bigger stuff coming in, like stuff that I talked about from the previous slide around like where the project's going, like some of the templating things and config stuff. So, but I'd say like I'm really excited for the user experience stuff that's come in, just to make it really clean experience for people to get started with.
Awesome. I'm always very excited to see, that friction of not having to, well, I love documentation and love really good documentation. It's an even better, to me, more rewarding experience to be able to jump into the CLI tool and to just kind of like intuitively start to go through things. It gives me flashbacks to when I first started working with Ruby, and I was just like, does this function call exist? I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to try it. And then it works. And that's so exciting to have happen with Waypoint, to be able to just go up and then just kind of like watch it do its thing. So I would absolutely love tools that are easier to use like that. And especially one for the developer workflow versus the operator workflow. Speaking of workflows, look at that segue. What workflows are something that you'd like to see more of when it comes to Waypoint? There are the happy paths to getting an application spun up into using Waypoint as a tool. But what are, this is kind of just a personal question. What more workflows that you would like to see in the space?
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of emerging paths that we see people doing, like, for example, and I would say this one's not really emerging. Like, I really love the idea, and you've seen like my hacking around in this, like the VS Code thing, right? Like, I think that like a lot of people, what we're seeing. So I'm a little bit about background on me. Like, I came up through a help desk at a major utility. Like, I didn't learn my first programming language until like 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm relatively young in the space. Now I love the space. I've played in there a lot. I've done cool things with it, but like, I came from like an infrastructure and not developer background by any means. And kind of, I had good community people along the way who signed me into the club and like and helped me get a member's jacket, right? Like, and I think that's one of the beauties of community, but that's a whole nother topic for another time. Um, I love the workflows that we're creating around making it very easy for people to be enter into the space. So when I think about things I want to see more of, it's things like the VS Code integration, or somebody might not be like a native Vim user, right? Or like somebody might get like really enjoy the way that the Kubernetes plugin in VS Code works and want that same experience for Waypoint. Not to say Waypoint is like Kubernetes at all. They're different. They're apples and oranges there. But like, if you look at a very mature VS Code plugin, something like the Kubernetes plugin, like, that's the kind of experience that I personally want inside of from Waypoint as well. I'd like to see more, and we're not far off from it, but like workflows that really make it easy for someone who didn't come from an app dev space to get started building in the space, right? Like, the whole reason I got started building web apps was because I wanted to build like simple reports for my bosses. Like, and I think most people who don't natively grow up in like the web dev space, that's where most people end up starting, is like, hey, I need to pull metrics from my vSphere clusters and give them to my boss without paying for an expensive reporting tool. I just want to call APIs all day. And like, how do we make that experience better for the person who doesn't know the space? How do we like make it easy for them to like adopt and jump into this pool and contribute? So those are workflows I'm excited for. I think that like the core value prop sounds like super markety, but like the core of like Waypoint kind of speaks for itself around like building, deploying, and releasing these systems. But like, I really want us to make it easier to dive into that space, and I think we're well on the way there. But I think it's more about how do people interact with Waypoint that I want to see next. Is like, not everyone's going to interact with this from a command line. Not everyone's going to run a Waypoint up all the time, right? Like, maybe people want to be able to run it inside of something else. So yeah, that's just Cody's personal opinion. Don't want to maintain that's that's like the HashiCorp perspective, but.
Absolutely, and I can vividly remember the first time that. So I've also got background in software engineering and went to school for a little bit around computer science, and that was and ended up dropping out and really looking at how I could start up my own business, and because I just loved software and I loved solving problems and getting to work with people on something that would shave minutes or hours or days off of their specific workflows that they're working with. And I can vividly remember finishing my first piece of software in that role, handing it off to the customer, and they said, "Great, I love this. Where can we run this? How do we host this?" And then me going, "Oh, oh," and really being faced with that, and I feel like that's something that Waypoint really takes the sander to and just gets rid of that really rough edge. as a developer, because it's typically when you're in a company, you're working with that operations team, and that can be, you might not know what you need or what you want, and being able to work with Waypoint and kind of get a faster feedback loop as to what you actually might need, or the team to just be able to say like, oh yeah, we got a Kubernetes cluster over here, or ECS, or something like that, is just really helpful to create that faster feedback loop. And even the Waypoint UI, I think, is really fantastic in showing you, when did I last deploy? What am I looking at? And just when I first loaded that up, that was not what I expected. And I was like blown away by the amount of data and everything else that I saw on that front. So kudos to the team. It's really
I'm
fantastic.
also a big fan, like culturally, of tools that bring people together. Like, it sounds really, really like corny to say, but I really believe that like we're better when we work together on things. And I think that like when you have a set of development teams that are like struggling to deploy 50 applications in a year or whatever, right? And they're kind of like handcrafting their way through that. And then you have this operations team that's trying to figure out how to support them behind the scenes and doesn't have like direct visibility into all of those handcrafted things that they have to do in order to make their projects work. That creates a division, and it creates like a natural silo that exists. But when you have a tool like and I'm not saying Waypoint is that tool today. I think that we're working very hard on this as kind of like a beacon in the sky and a place to get to. But when you have a tool that creates consistency inside of an environment, just like Terraform did, right? Like when you have a tool that creates that consistent experience, it's something that brings those teams together, and it brings those teams to be able to understand the work that each of them are doing and to help each other like support each other better. And I think that like tools that do that have a very special place in my heart, and tools that invite people to collaborate with each other and invite people to be consistent and level the playing field, I think is a really, really special and a really cool thing. So I'm just my thoughts on that.
And no, I agree, and I think it's like you said. I've been in several different contexts, and and just corporations where there has been that really there's that want to focus. Like I've worked on SRE teams and on systems engineering teams, and there's this thought around, we know the best way to do this thing, and even if that's true, it makes it very difficult when you kind of you're like you said, you're putting up a silo and you're not creating a welcoming environment, or you're even if you're not actively thinking that or wanting to do that, making it more difficult on the development teams. And even, in some cases they might say, I get you're trying to do the right thing here. I just don't understand how I can, productively work with you. I don't understand these abstractions. As a developer nowadays, we saw a lot of that field being asked to learn operations and DevOps, just do it, and it's like, well, we have to, there's got to be some explaining or a common interface to work through. And again, I feel like Waypoint is working towards kind of eliminating that silo and making that line very faint, and just kind of like a good place for teams to agree to speak the same language and work together. Tools like Nomad and Kubernetes and Consul and Vault and things like that allows us to be specific and specialized in all of the right places, and then to be able to kind of hand off and work with one another. So that's cool. Absolutely agree.
The thing is, like, the thing to think about real quick on like the last thing I'll say on that other topic was like, people like I generally believe that most people are good, and most people aren't. Like, there's very few of those like the bad engineers you hear about where they just don't want to talk to the ops guy and they don't like the ops guy and they're so much better than the ops guy. Those are actually really rare, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of them I've actually run into. More commonly, people just get wrapped up in their job, and people have a set of tasks they're just trying to get done so they can get back to their family at night. Right? Like, people have a set of jobs they want to get done so they can go log on to that video game at the end of their day and cool off for the day, especially these days when stress is so much higher than normal anyways. So it's like making it easier for people to collaborate and not have to come out of their zone in order to collaborate is a good thing. Like, most people don't not want to collaborate. They're just so busy trying to handcraft those 50 deployment workflows in pipeline that they just don't have the time for it, or they don't have, like, not in a negative way, like the patience to be able to step out and do that because they've got stuff to get done. So it's like, when we characterize people this way, it's not to say that like no one does this intentionally. It's just that we all get wrapped up, just like I do. We get wrapped up in our tunnel and work on our thing. And collaboration is often challenging when people aren't in that same workflow as you. But when you standardize the workflow, so that everyone has that same workflow, it's easier to operate in that same path.
And I've found too with that, if you have somebody that's like especially emotionally calloused or curmudgeon-y, there's typically a good story there, and that's it. When I see something that's a little bit more caustic or a little bit difficult to work with, I love trying to kind of get to the root of the why do you feel this way? What's actually going on? What's that one story that really changed the way that you think, and kind of try to dig that up, because I agree, it's never somebody with that intent to be bad or to make things difficult. It is always the like, well, I just want to get home and have dinner with my family, or whatever it might be. So that's a great point. Speaking of, I'll try to segue here into surprising. In terms of plugins, that's something that I really like seeing with Waypoint, is the ability to, if there is a new build system or if there is a new type of deployment mechanism or release mechanism, there's this plugin system within Waypoint to allow for people to develop for that. So if I wanted to say, get this implemented with either like a CNCF technology or something new, I can do that. I have the opportunity to create something for that. And then obviously I'm sure that, we're going to develop some too over time from, HashiCorp directly. Have you seen any really surprising plugins? Like I haven't seen, I know Terraform has the Domino's pizza provider. Have you seen anything fun like that? I have not seen that for Waypoint yet, deploy pizza to your house, but I'm still waiting on that one.
Well, here's what you do: you alias Waypoint to Domino's, so you can do Domino's up, and that's what you'll get. But no, like I think right now we haven't gotten into the phase of like the fun plugins yet, unfortunately. I'm waiting for it. What I think is like super cool is to see like some of the plugins people have actually created. Like one person on the Discuss forums created like an archive plugin that'll just basically spit out the application binaries and do an archive for you, which is pretty cool. Like they use that to chain into some other stuff. We had the same user created the Google Functions plugin that will deploy a Waypoint workflow onto Google Functions, which is like super cool. I think the ECS one is really cool, just because ECS is kind of a challenge to get through the first time, and there's a little bit like a few unique unique things in there. But I think what I find most surprising is like the amount that people are jumping into it. I was helping out with a console one where somebody was like, "Hey, I see you have Nomad here," and I found the Nomad definitions inside of the Waypoint code, and I hacked in like the console integration, because the console integration inside of Nomad is really easy. So I was able to add it's another struct and another set of configs. Like, I think what's most surprising is the amount that people are diving in. It's not so much the output that's coming, it's the amount that people are diving in and playing with these plugins that I personally find the most surprising and like refreshing, is that people want to build stuff in here and they want to get started in here and they want to try stuff out and try to figure it out. And I think that's really cool.
I know I'm slightly biased, working for HashiCorp, but I like seeing the types of discussion on GitHub around, I don't see HashiCorp as kind of coming into this space and saying like, hey, get out of here, we're going to write all the plugins and we're going to call the shots. It's not like that at all. It's very much like, what do you want to see? Like, this is a great opportunity for the community to come in and to work with this type of plugin, or like, you should absolutely do that. I really like that kind of thought and just delegation. It reduces stress on us, and really just kind of opens it up to the community. And I like you had said before, I love seeing that too, is that community first type of aspect and focus, and it's just fun to build things together. And so I really like to see projects that kind of spur that want. And with the holidays coming up, I'm very curious to see if people have time to work on things, what comes out of that. And who knows, maybe we'll have some fun time to collaborate on a New Year's pipeline or something like that we could do. 2021.
I'm waiting for you to do I'm waiting for you to do a Waypoint hackathon and invite me. That's your homework, Taylor. I'm waiting for you to do the Waypoint hackathon.
We'll do a science fair project. I love this.
I want to build. Can you do a volcano up? Is that a thing? Can I have Waypoint launch a volcano?
It's like the feedback loop intrigues me on that front.
Maybe not the best idea. Maybe not the best idea after all. Maybe reevaluate.
I'll call you once I have my Mentos and Coke collaboration. Um, when it comes to working on, either Waypoint core or plugins, one of the questions I always like to ask is, what is the best way to get involved with the project? We can always go to GitHub and start to pull things down and start working with them. But in terms of, finding the right focus for you as an end user practitioner or contributor, what would you say is the best way in getting involved with Waypoint and getting the things developed that you want to see developed?
What I think is like it's a little fanboyish, but like what I think is super cool is how active like Mitchell and Evan, the main engineers who kind of who spearheaded Waypoint, how active they are on the Discuss forum, right? Like, so my like even not wearing the HashiCorp shirt, the best way to get involved is to comment on the Discuss forum. Like, say anything. Like if you have an idea, right? Like there's something like, hey, I kind of was thinking this would be cool. Like we talk about that on the project calls. We talk about what's popping up on the Discuss forum. We talk about, it's highly likely that if you had an idea, it will come up on our call and we will talk about it. So the best way to get involved is to jump in on that Discuss forum and talk about what you're thinking, your experience, your feedback, the problems you're into. And what I would say is don't be shy about asking, hey, I see this problem. What do you think is the best way to solve it? Like I saw, we have like a little back channel communication that goes on. And I saw one of the people in the chat was talking about being like new to the space in college right now for all of this. And I know that when I was in that space, like I always wondered how to get involved on things like this. Jump on the forum and say an idea and ask, hey, how could I get started on this? If I wanted to try this out, can somebody give me like the 5-second version of how I would start looking at something like this? And you'll be surprised the answers you get. People might say, hey, this is a really tough one. You have a hard time. Here's where you can look, but there's dragons, it's going to be tough. Or someone might say, hey, this is a great first issue for you to jump onto and take a look at. And the thing is, like, feedback loop happens, right? And you're going to get good collaboration with other people in the community, but then people, like really senior people, like James Bayer, one of the VP of product management, he's active on the Discuss forum, jumping in and helping resolve issues. You're likely to have conversations with people that'll have a lot of good knowledge to impart on you on these journeys. And the thing is, like, it's one of those like risks and rewards thing. You don't get the big rewards without taking a risk. And it's a scary thing to jump into, even on a simple forum post. Like I still get nervous posting questions to the team internally because I don't want to look silly. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing, but like I'm always impressed with the result that I get. And I'm always impressed with the way I'm treated. So like, don't be shy about jumping in and having a question or an idea or a feedback item. You'll be shocked the response you get, most likely. As long as you're not mean, just be nice. Kindness matters. So
that's a great point. I feel like that's so for those of you that know me, know that I work within the Kubernetes space as well, and love working with those open source teams. And that's something open source really fascinates me in general because of that. There is this kind of like icebreakery stage where you are kind of afraid, like you're working in public, which is also a great book, which I recommend you check out. I'll find a link for that and post it in the chat later, but a great book by Stripe Press, and called Working in Public. And that's what it is. You're working visibly in front of thousands or hundreds of thousands or people, not to spur anyone's anxiety, but it's you do mess up and things happen, and it's not something that anyone holds against you. Again, people aren't just mean for the sake of being mean, especially in the open source community. There's that understanding that this is a place where we work things out. Mistakes will and can and do happen, and it's a great place to document those. Now, instead of being like, this thing really messed me up for a little bit, I couldn't figure it out. Now you have that, and it's kind of preserved in history. If you're working somewhere, in a space like GitHub or GitLab or something like that, and again, you just meet so many friendly people who are just willing to help you or kind of point out things that you can improve on. And I personally feel like it makes you a better developer or operator or practitioner. And it's really just, to me, it's a kind of form of mentorship and just way to kind of sharpen yourself. But it's really, really fantastic. I liked one of my colleagues, Jackie, said hundreds of thousands. Oh no, which okay, which is a lot of fun. One other quick question, Cody. I posted the Discuss forum for Waypoint in there on our discusshashicorp.com site, and notice that the ID for that forum place is 51. So is the Waypoint discussion area 51? on our Discuss platform? Is there a reason for that?
I can neither confirm nor deny. No, actually, I think that was just. I think that was as much as I'd love to have a good story there. I didn't even realize that. So I'm gonna guess that was just the sheer luck of the draw. But hey, that works. Lots of secrets in this base. Lots of secrets in here.
Yeah, please no photographs past this area.
Right.
All right. Awesome. Well, with that, would love to open up the forum for any live questions that anyone might have. And then, based on what people want to know, or if there's kind of a shortage of that, Cody, if you want to, if you've got some time to jump into a live demo, I think that'd be a lot of fun to show folks, what Waypoint is and kind of some of the use cases there.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Do you want me to spin up the demo now, or you want to hang out for a couple seconds to see if we get any questions first?
Yeah, I'd say we can hang out for a couple seconds.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the cool things that I saw while we're waiting for questions, one of the things that I liked that Mitchell was talking about was Waypoint 02 and just some of the features that he's working on and that the team is working on. And the Vault integration with being able to source values and secure variables, I thought was really helpful and interesting, and it makes me happy to see that that's something that's coming along. I'm trying to kind of further my GitHub Actions experience and create some more workflows in there. So I think that that's going to pair very well with those types of workflows. And then some work that a colleague, Rosemary Wong, is working on. So very, very excited for everything coming up there.
We have GitHub Actions support. There is support for GitHub Actions in Waypoint today. So. And what's interesting is, like, while we're queuing up some questions, one of the earliest PRs was around bringing like Vault support in for Kubernetes, right? So like you can actually like go in and some of this stuff kind of works out of the box because we've built a good foundation around it. So like anyone who's worked with Vault and Kubernetes knows that most of the configurations are done via annotations, and you can bring those annotations into a Waypoint service, right? So you can apply those annotations on, and then when it comes up, it's going to actually connect just like any other application that you deployed via kube control apply would, right? So if you have those annotations in place, Vault's going to see that and say, hey, I need to give you the Vault sidecar and do stuff. Same thing goes for console, right? If we apply the console annotations, it'll register against console success. It'll give it a sidecar, and like you can start actually doing stuff with that. So.
Awesome. We did get one question in, and that was, is there anything that Waypoint isn't good for? Making a sandwich, I think, immediately comes to mind, at least right now. Never say never.
Yeah, I'd say that like Waypoint is Waypoint has an opinionated way of doing some of its deployments. And if you have a very customized deployment that's very focused on, like, if, for example, like we don't want to steal you out of the environment that you're already deploying into, right? If you're like, hey, look, I only deploy against ECS is a bad example because I think that the Waypoint experience on ECS is really, really good. But if you're deploying only against Heroku today, right? That's all you deploy against. We're not telling you that you should change your entire operating pattern because Waypoint is great. What we're saying is, like, if you're deploying against multiple places, that Waypoint's going to be a better experience for you, probably. But if you're deploying consistently against one spot and you have a process that works already, like, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Like, if that works for you today, don't change that. So, like, I guess my short answer to that is, if you have a functioning process that is working today against like a single destination, then Waypoint's probably not for you. There are obviously like very like random things inside of the build, deploy, manage space that like Waypoint is not. But like the biggest one I'd say is that, like, we're not saying that you should stop doing deployments any other way. We're just saying that if you want, like, consistency is a good thing. If you're deploying against multiple places and you want to simplify that consistency experience, and Waypoint is for you.
Awesome. One other question that I saw come in was, how does Waypoint integrate with Helm?
So this is an evolving conversation. Today, it does not. Well, let me back that up a little bit. There is I want to say it's an integration. Waypoint has the ability. One of the plugins for Waypoint is an exec plugin, and what exec will do will let you run execution commands against a thing. Now, if you're using the Waypoint Kubernetes plugin to do a deployment, the exec command could be used to do like a Helm deployment alongside that, but it's going to be kind of I don't want to say it's a hack, but it's kind of, it's MacGyvering, right? It's duct taping things together. You're going to pipe in Helm install blah. And you do get the consistency out of that, right? So if you want to have that run against on-prem, you want to run it inside of a pipeline, you want to have it automatically ran via some other method, like it will work, but ultimately it's not like a Helm integration. There's definitely conversations going on about what tying into something like Helm looks like, what having a Helm deployment be done via Waypoint actually looks like in the right way to do it. Evolving conversations. I don't really have any like good solid details just to share on that one. That's a good one to bring up on the Discuss forum. Honestly, if you want to generate some discussion on that, I would highly recommend dropping a post, and seeing where that goes, because I'm sure that Mitchell will speak up and have some good feedback, or Evan or Jen will speak up and have some good feedback on that.
I think that I am curious to kind of see how that discussion evolves, just personally as well. I think that I've always been really excited to see that I can stand up my infrastructure with Terraform, get my clusters running on whatever cloud I choose, spin up Kubernetes, and then use Terraform to install those Helm charts. And so I think kind of, but when it comes to a delta there, or kind of sourcing values and variables, it feels like a good workflow right now, from my standpoint. But I'm very curious to see how that's going to evolve within Waypoint, and then kind of see where I might be able to shift some of my workloads over on that front. The same author of that question that asked about Helm asked about GitLab CI/CD and kind of where Waypoint might fit into that as well.
Yeah, so it was a day actually we added, or GitLab themselves actually added a tutorial for running Waypoint in GitLab day one. So like they were one of the first people that actually, I think they might have actually been the first partner to post on their own, like, hey, like you can run this inside of GitLab CI as well. Personally, I love the GitLab CI workflow. Like I'm a huge fan of GitLab. I think they do a lot of real like stuff really the right way. And their CI is an example of that. So like it runs really well inside of GitLab CI. I have it in my home lab set up. It might not be working right this minute, but I do have it in the home lab running, and it's a great experience.
Awesome. Thank you. One from coworker Rosemary. Hey, Rosemary. Any plans? And I was like, what up? Any plans to have Waypoint plugins for serverless frameworks?
Definitely. So like the conversation of Lambda comes up probably like every other day in some way, shape, or form. I mentioned Google Functions earlier. One of the community members created the plugin for Google Function, which is pretty cool. So definitely plans to expand into that space. No doubt about it. So
I'm very excited for that one. I think that there's I feel like that's one of the biggest things I've seen across many teams for many years is what is the right way to go about deploying a serverless application, and how do we work with that? You can again set things up with Terraform, but it becomes very difficult when having to zip up your source code and kind of like go through do this dance to kind of get those functions deployed. So I'm very excited about that one.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is I think that this is Cody's opinion. Again, we're going to flag this, and I'll be interested to hear your take as well as somebody in the Kubernetes ecosystem. I think we can all agree that there's a pretty aggressive Kubernetes hype cycle that we've been in for probably 2 or 3 years. And I love Kubernetes, as you know, like I have background in the space as well. Like I love the platform, but I do think that in tech we tend to over rotate when a new thing comes around, and you hear people talk about, oh, we're in the midst of our Kubernetes adoption strategy, but when you ask them like Kubernetes questions, they're like, oh, I don't really have the answer to that yet. And it's like you get the impression of like, oh, you're hype cycling. Like it's a thing you have to get on board with. You do, and you should, but you might not be doing it for the right reasons. And I think what we're seeing is we're starting to see the beginning of the hype cycle cool, and people are adopting Kubernetes as a tool in their tool belt, right? Like, and that's like I think that's the place that we all want tools to get to, is just to be a tool in your tool belt. And I think that Kubernetes becomes a tool to build other bigger tools with, like it's that whole platform for building platforms concept. And as that hype cycle cools, you're seeing things like serverless start to get a lot more attention. And what's interesting is like the Kube hype cycle and the serverless hype cycle hit at about the same time, but the Kube hype cycle went like way faster. But now that the Kube hype cycle is calming a bit, we're seeing serverless kick in. We're seeing things like ECS, like sometimes people just want to run a managed Docker instance, right? Like they just want containers to run, and they don't want to have to worry about how many nodes they have and what their PVC strategy is and all of that. They just want a Docker instance running. And for like more redundant systems and things they want to run at high scale and dynamic scaling, they'll run Kube for that. So like I think since that cycle is cooling, we'll see a lot of these plugins really shine. Things like a serverless plugin, things like the ECS, ACI, Google Cloud Run, like these things will start to shine a lot more because honestly, like the IT ecosystem is more accepting of that since the hype cycle is cool. But I'm interested in your take on that. Again, that's Cody's opinion. That's not HashiCorp opinion. That's Cody's opinion.
It's such an interesting thing in kind of seeing that too. I've noticed the same as well, and a lot of it's very difficult. I'm seeing to kind of get that day one level of knowledge and experience because Kubernetes is very complex because it solved all these historical problems when it came to orchestration and hosting your application. And then, but once all those things were solid, it was kind of like, for a phone as a visual tool, it's like, okay, we got, this camera, all these things are great, but then how can we make it better? And you start to abstract. And then it becomes very complex because this one thing got divided into 100 and each of those is configurable. And kind of that's where you see a lot of the confusion coming in. But if you take that day one approach and you're able to kind of focus on what are the big picture items that I can use, like services and deployments and volumes, things like that, it becomes a little bit easier. But being able to just have that serverless function or something like OpenFAS or just that singular thing at the end of the day is really helpful. And I feel like that kind of helps with that journey as well. But cool.
Totally.
Awesome. I have an incoming question about the Waypoint roadmap from Valentin, and so we'll wait for that. One other thing that I had, one thing I've talked about a lot, it kind of reminds me of Otto, may Otto rest in peace, is the the want for teams to be able to say, like, I know my application needs some kind of storage, I know it needs a runtime, and just, I wonder if we're going to see that in the future at some point in time, is just be able to say, like, I know I need these high level things, go take care of it for me. I don't care if it's Postgres, I don't care if it's MySQL, Mongo, I just know I do this and I interact with my data in this way, figure it out. And I wonder if we'll start to see more declarative things open up in that space too.
I do wonder. I mean, I think that I think that like some of the space is maturing in such a way that like there are intelligent assumptions that can be made about things and abstractions that can be done. Abstractions are scary though, because so much stuff has already been written without the idea of an abstraction in place. So it's like there's a happy medium that I'm not sure we're at yet, but I feel like we're getting there, and tooling is maturing to a place where it can handle these concepts. And like there's enough ways to harvest data now that will help you understand. Like a good example in Waypoint, if you a lot of my demos use the Docker plugin, and I'll show it in a little while when we do like the live demo portion of this. Actually, I think we're going to do that here in a minute. But like, and why don't we jump? I can show it visually better than I can tell it. So let's table that part, and we'll just do demo and talk.
Awesome. One final question is, and then we can move on to the live demos. Obviously, if you have any more questions, feel free to queue them up. We'll try to get to them at the end, or feel free to post them on discuss.hashicorp.com in the Waypoint section, and we'll be able to take a look at them there as well. The last question we have is from Valentin, and it's, I see that service brokering is not on the roadmap, but how far are the plans for that V2? Question mark.
I think I'd probably need to understand more context of like service brokering in this case. Like, service brokering is a pretty broad term. So like in the context of this question, like, what do we mean?
Absolutely. And for that too, I think that you can kind of use tools like Vault. Like I feel like in 0.2, there is going to be that type of Vault interaction to be able to source things and get your one-time passwords and your secrets and things like that. So I feel like that kind of level of interaction will help out. But yeah, if there's anything more you want to ask Valentin on that front, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to help. But with that, I'd love to turn over to you, Cody, and yeah, we can go through a live demo and kind of give you a run of what Waypoint looks like.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to have some fun doing this from kind of as much from scratch as we can. We got about 9 minutes, I think, right? Is that right? Cool. So we'll do a little bit of a faster version. So here I have a application directory with some stuff in it. I have a Waypoint HCL file that's already been created. I've got an application here. So if I go in, look at source and then app.js, this is a React-based application. So it's pretty basic. It's one that I've done for a few demos now. So what we'll do is first we will do an install. So like any good magician, I like to show that there's nothing running in my environment. I'm also in, I also have a Kubernetes environment set up. I think this is my on-prem one. I could be wrong though. Nope, that's GKE. So we'll switch over and we'll hit my vSphere context. Cool. So this is an old one, so we'll just get rid of that real quick. Oh, okay, cool. The pod is still there, so we'll go. There we
go. If I have any long or lingering pods, I always like to say the pod is strong with that one, but to myself alone in my office.
Sure it's a stateful set, so I bet anything if I do it again, yeah, of course, there's a stateful set there. So doesn't matter, doesn't exist. You do not see the old version. We're not going to hit it anyways. So when you get started with Waypoint, we've got the Waypoint execution or Waypoint binary here. This is running, I believe, the 0.1.5 that's in Homebrew right now. So I'm running on Mac OS, so I ran this on Homebrew. Getting started is super easy. We'll do Waypoint install against Docker. We'll accept the terms of service. And we can very quickly switch over and do like a Docker PS, and we can see that server coming up. And if we take a look at the Waypoint HCL, this is one that has like a bunch of old stuff in it that's not actually needed. Now, this is something I was talking about that I said we'd come back to. We're not running on ACI in this case. We're just running in Docker. And we'll change this name. Cool. Now, here I'm using the Docker builder, which means it's going to reference a Docker file and it's going to build based on that file. But when I talked about tooling maturing to be able to understand what you're trying to accomplish, we actually by default use the cloud native build packs. Actually, it's not default. We do have the ability to use the cloud native build packs. And if anyone's familiar with that or not familiar with that project rather, what that project does is when we build these applications, it'll look at the source code of your app and determine what type of container needs to run. So it would look at the source code of this app and say, oh, this is a React-based application. I can throw this in Node.js and run it. So what it'll do is it'll use the Node.js builder from the cloud native build packs to build this application and run it. So you don't even have to have a Docker file next to this at all. You just do a Waypoint up with the build pack plugin used, and it'll detect and build the application for you without you defining it out, which I think is really cool from an idea of like the tooling maturing to understand kind of runtimes that are needed. Instead of you having to go in and build a Docker file from scratch, you just run the build pack version and let it go to town. In this case, we're going to stick though with the Docker file just because we're running low on time. So if I cat the Docker file, we can see nothing really crazy in there. It's running Nginx, so probably more aligned with what people will do in production anyways. We're going to do a Waypoint init, which will initialize it against the Waypoint server. We'll bring up the UI real quick just so we can see. Dark mode, serious now. And we will do a Waypoint up. And if we switch back into that UI, there we go. We actually see a live build log within the UI as well as within the terminal. So if we were collaborating, Taylor, like this is running on my Docker here locally, so it doesn't really apply. But I could create a token for you against the Kubernetes-based deployment and have you able to actually go in and see this deployment happening live for you. Like we could be collaborating on this and see the same data live, which is kind of a cool thing. So it's deploying, it's coming up, roughly whole sailfish. And if we bring this up, it takes a few minutes on Docker for it to actually start listening. So the failure here is not, there we go, took a few. Come on, little fella. Now, what's really cool about this is if you drop this into chat, other people will be able to hit this. So like this is running on my local Docker instance running here. Like if I do a Docker PS, we can see it in there. You can actually hit that from your system if you wanted to. Like you could actually hit this. I'll drop this into our chat over here somewhere, or not actually. There we go. You can actually hit that locally and play with it if you wanted to. So now we're running locally in Docker. I'm going to go Waypoint install, and I'm going to switch this to Kubernetes instead. And if I switch back over here and I do a KGB watch, we can see it coming up. So now this is running in my vSphere based Kubernetes clusters, cluster API cluster for vSphere, nothing too fancy. Metal LB running as the load balancer for it, so it'll get a load balancer address just fine. That's waiting for the service to finish. Takes a little while to spin up the first time. It's pulling down a fresh container, so it's up and running now. And we now have our address. So what I'll do is I'll very quickly go in. We'll make a quick change. Let's see. We'll go ahead and take out these comments. I don't remember why I commented that out, but I think I just commented it out for the sake of demos. Okay, that's a fine error message. Cool. We init again since we're on a new environment, so it's a new server environment. And if we do a waypoint up again, it'll go out and build once more. Now, while this is building, you can think of the parallel of this running in pipeline. So I'm doing this locally on my desktop now, and it's a good iterative process back and forth. But if you think about this running in pipeline, GitLab CI, let's use that example since we talked about it earlier. You could have this set up to run every time you commit code into that application. And every time it runs, it's going to go out and run this waypoint up. It's going to get you a new deployment URL every time. You could even parse out that response and get that URL. And actually like feed that back as like a return value, right? So that you can actually see that in CI, and you can have kind of your own preview URL experience around how these deploy. Properly capable Orca. So we're just waiting for this to finish coming up. It's going to take a few, just like it did before. Come on, little fella. There it goes. I have some sad CSS going on in this page right now. So there's something wrong with my image there. I don't know why that is doing that. Yeah, sad CSS is why it's doing that. But again, that's accessible by anybody externally as well. And if we go back and look, we can see I've got that deployment URL here as well. If I go in and do waypoint UI authenticate again, this is a different environment now. It's not Docker anymore, but we can go in, we can see deployments. We can see the URL there. We can go in and pull logs. So if we go back, builds, that's actual log for the actual build. So yeah, that's the quick and speedy demo as we get to the end of our time. But like what I was saying around the CI experience is the idea that like this experience becomes consistent, like when you're running in CI, and you could have this running every time you check that code in. So you're not even having to do all of this like management locally. You can have all the environment variables set for your Waypoint server and having CI just handle the deployment. And then it's consistent to what you're doing on the desktop, right? Like your processes are the same, whether you're running it in CI or on-prem on your laptop. I think it's a pretty cool thing.
I just love so much that you have all those tools available to just be able to, take a look at your stack, see what you've deployed, and then have the ability to look at logs, execute things, and just kind of go through that workflow. Those are, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, where are the logs? Or I just want to run this one thing. So thank you again so much to the Waypoint team for making such an incredible tool. Thank you so much, Cody, for coming by today and for chatting with us today on today's office hours. Hope that y'all had all of your questions answered. If not, don't fret, no worries. Feel free to raise those up either on GitHub or within the discusshashicorp.com platform, and check out Waypoint underneath there. Again, we found out that's area 51, so you are allowed to this area, so please check that out and let us know if you need anything there. I've dropped our Twitter handles in the chat if you want to follow us along. I promise horrible puns as well as some other technical things on that front. Cody, any final words before we sign off today?
Oh, thanks for the time. And if anybody wants to get started in the space, play with some of like actually building applications and going on a journey, like I'm happy always to help out in the community. So feel free to reach out. I'm available on Twitter, so drop me a DM anytime.
Cool. Please at us. Yeah, if you have anything you want to share that's interesting, fun, or if you need any help on Waypoint, feel free to hit us up. We will see y'all next week and hope that you have a whole bunch of fun during these holidays and that you have a great rest of the day. See y'all soon. Thank you so much, everybody.